Man, are y'all seeing what's going on in the world today? It's crazy and I'm tired of it, man. We've been doing some quality research in the past couple months, and we think it's very important that you guys hear what we have to say, especially considering what's going on. The threat of terrorism in the Western Hemisphere has increased significantly. Today, we're going to explain to you what terrorism is exactly, and we're going to distinguish between it and hate crime because it's a very subjective topic.
Do you know what terrorism is? Terrorism is the use of violence and intimidation in the pursuit of political aims. A few examples of terrorism are the 9/11 attacks, the San Bernardino shooting, and the Europe attacks on Paris and Brussels. The 9/11 attack took place in New York on September 11, 2001. There was also an attack at the Pentagon and a plane crash in Pennsylvania. This was one of the biggest attacks in the history of the United States. The overall fatality rate at the time was 2,977 people, but the total is increasing because thousands are dying from cancer.
Another well-known terrorist attack that happened recently last year was the San Bernardino shootings in California. This shooting left 14 people dead and 22 people injured, and this was one of the first attacks on U.S. soil that was ISIS related. This was also considered one of the biggest attacks in the U.S. since 9/11, unfortunately.
Now, the other one is the Europe attacks on Paris and Brussels. The Paris attack took place on November 13, 2015, and the Brussels attack took place just last week on March 22, 2016. The Paris attack left about 130 people dead and 300 plus injured. The Brussels attack left approximately 31 dead and 270 injured. The Brussels attack came just 4 days after the largest suspect in the Paris attack was arrested. Both of these attacks were also related to ISIS. Can hate crimes be classified as acts of terror? There have also been an increase of hate crimes in the past years.
One example of hate crime that's happened is the Charleston shooting, as we all know. Unfortunately, this happened last June in South Carolina. In this incident, 9 black U.S. citizens were shot in a church, and the shooter, unfortunately, was a white male named Dylan Roof, who was 21 years old, and it was seen that he was involved with some white supremacy with him and with pictures of him holding up a Confederate flag.
Another example of a hate crime terror was the Wisconsin Sikh Temple Massacre. The massacre took place on August 5, 2012, just after the Colorado movie theater shooting. 6 people at the temple were fatally shot, and about 3 or 4 were seriously injured. The shooter was 40-year-old Michael Wade Page. Page shot himself after he was shot by an officer.
How does the FBI judge whether an act is labeled a hate crime or an act of terrorism? This is the big question. By definition, there is a difference between acts of terrorism and hate crime, but in reality, the difference is very slim and subjective if you think about it. Terrorism is defined as a violence in pursuit of political aims, but these days, racial issues can be considered a political topic, so that's why it's kind of fishy, you know? Hate crime incidents involve harm by definition to an innocent individual on U.S. soil, and their goal is to influence the policy or of hate towards a certain group of people.
The FBI have been working to put terrorism and hate crimes to an end by monitoring online activity and phone calls. We can clearly see from the above material that there is a very fine line between hate crime and terrorism.
As we conclude, the difference between an act of terrorism and a hate crime, the examples we provided, and the vivid evaluations of the terms allows us to have an increased knowledge of the topic, which will help us critically analyze future incidents in the future that occur. Having a better understanding of these different types of terrorism give us an expansion of knowledge, which will allow us for better understanding when we see these things happen in the future, because we can tell that it's going to continue happening. The rise of terrorism in the world has reached an all-time high.